Tomorrow is draft day, and that means today we're doing some superlatives like most athletic player, best shooter, best defender, and much, much more coming up on Locked On NBA Big Board. What's up? My name is Richard Stayman. You might know me better as MavsDraft on Twitter. And speaking of the draft, tomorrow is draft day. Today is Tuesday, June 25th. And today I'm going to do some of these superlatives. If you don't know me, my name is Richard Stayman again, MavsDraft. I do NBA Draft scouting reports, have done this since 2017 publicly. I've had some big hits like Donovan Mitchell, Desmond Bane. Those were two of my original big hits in my first few years. I also do mock drafts on my Substack, MavsDraft.substack.com. It's community mocks. I founded a lot of that as well in the draft community. But appreciate everybody who continues to listen to us, make us your first listen on this draft eve. Means a lot to us. Really appreciate everybody who does that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have wound down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So for this episode, I wanted to do some superlatives. Who's the best of this, the most of this? Let's just dive right into it. I think this is a really fun exercise to kind of identify where everybody fits. ESPN put this article out a week ago as well with their own thoughts. And I figured why not put my own 2 cents on this too. So let's start with this. I think the best shooter in the class, it's hard not to say Reed Sheppard, right? Like, I mean, he shot 50+% from three and had like an 80% plus from the free throw line. Like that alone stands out. I know he overachieved, but how is it not him? Like he is that kind of shooter where he can shoot on the move. He played as an off-ball player. He could also be a little bit of an off-the-dribble scorer. I just feel like he's easily the best shooter in the class. That one to me is as straightforward as it gets. It's probably the easiest one. For best defender, this is another straightforward one that I really like. I think it's Ryan Dunn. He can truly guard 1 through 5. The big reason why he's not higher on most boards is myself included, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, I dropped mine right before recording this. So go check that out on my Substack. Again, MavsDraft.substack.com. Ryan Dunn, though, if he could play any offense, like he is purely a dunker. He's going to be a 5 on offense, and he is 6'7". And at the combine, he worked out with the centers in their group, and that is alarming. He's going to have a hard time fitting as a wing defensively and a center on offense. It's really hard to make those kind of guys work. Let's do. I keep going back and forth. Actually, before I go back to this one, I think best defender nominees in this were Devin Carter's right up there. I think he has to be in that mix. You look at his teammate, Ryan Dunn's teammate, Reese Beekman has to be right up in that mix. I think those two guys are really strong. Montas Buzelis even has a candidate. He could be a candidate, even though he doesn't have crazy long arms. I think he's somebody. Stephon Castle has to be in that mix. Donovan Clingan, because he's that level of a rim protector. And of course, the number one player, Alex Sarr, because he's so switchable, can potentially defend the rim. But his is a little bit more theoretical, I think, than the others. And then 2 off-ball defenders I really like. Kevin McCullough. If you've kept up with college basketball, you know he's been one of the best college basketball defenders in the entire country for the last 3+ years, I would say. And then also there's Zaccharie Risacher, who seems to be the consensus number 1 pick at this point. Arguably the best off-ball defender in the class. I think he's really intelligent in that regard, but he gets beat on the ball. So a little bit more easily for someone with his just kind of defensive profile. So I think that hurts him a little. The most athletic player. So I'll admit this one has been the toughest one for me. I've dodged this. I've jumped around it. I'm having a hard time with this. So my gut says Yves Missi, because he's a big that can really explode out of the gym. But he doesn't I feel like this is generally a wings award, or superlative. So I'm having a hard time. There's no wing that truly stands out as an insane athlete that grades out at a very high level athletically. You think of the Jalen Greens, right? That kind of player. Scoot Henderson, even. I know he's a guard, but Like you think of somebody who's a little bit smaller that can absolutely get up, like Nate Robinson is the prime example, the smallest player that can get the highest off the floor. There's really none of that this year. So maybe AJ Johnson, he's probably the best non-big candidate, but I would say Yves Missi is right up there as well. And with Yves, I mean, he's got a lot of work to do because he's pretty raw, but I do think there is a good element of him where it's like that could turn into useful athleticism just from that alone, where he can be a rim runner, he can be a play finisher, pick and roll. He has a lot to work on, but I do think that there is also a lot to work with. Another one, I would say smartest player in this draft is another one I've been having a hard time with. There are some players in this class that can really make smart decisions. I think DeRon Holmes is actually one of them. He's a guy who I have in my lottery, really that like second tier, third tier kind of guy where it's really second, that it's these guys who should be first round picks, like slam dunks. They have a place in the NBA. And I think that these smart players really do stick. That's almost my entire first round grades. It's just guys who are smart and know how to play basketball. Another one I really like is Anton Watson, from Gonzaga. I put my scouting report up last night on him. He just understands basketball at a ridiculously high level. And I think Reed Shepherd could be up there too. Donovan Clingan, like a lot of the top players deserve to be in this mold. I think Stephon Castle's up there too. Just guys who win are essentially these guys. And kind of going hand in hand with that, I would say a lot of these guys are also candidates for best winner. I would say my choice would be Donovan Clingan, but I mean, because he won the back-to-back national championships, he's only been a winner at college, to be quite honest. I don't even think he lost double-digit games in his entire time at UConn, maybe barely double-digit, if so. But I think he's one of those guys that has just won at every single level. And I think there's value in that. And he's, to me, the highest floor player in the entire draft. Just because of what he does. It's really Reed Shepherd on it in a vacuum. But when you factor in that he's a big, and the big men can change how the game is played so much more easily than a guard, I think Clingan is there. And also, like, the guards are just a little bit more easily ready, like easily available. So I would say Clingan is my pick on that. Last one of this segment. Let's do this. I think there's a really interesting story in here that for best story, I think there's two guys that are going to go undrafted, maybe squeeze in the very end, but they're generally seen around the 50s and 60s on mocks and big boards, myself included. There are two players who I've studied recently that I didn't have as prospects more than 3 months ago when March Madness started, and that is Isaac Jones out of Washington State and Enrique Freeman out of Akron. Enrique's is really cool. He told me this one at the Combine, and then it obviously blew up because I guess he told a lot of other people. It wasn't just exclusive to me. But his story is he started as an academic academic scholarship at Akron. He did not have a basketball scholarship. He was not recruited. He was just a tall guy who hooped. He then went to try out for Akron, got a walk-on the team as a freshman, spent 5 years there, eventually became one of the most awarded players in the MAC by the entire time his career was done. I think he was the player. Yeah, he was this year's MAC Player of the Year. 3 times he was all MAC. 4 times he was on all defense. He was the Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago in the MAC. So that is really impressive. Obviously, it's a mid-major, but to dominate going from a walk-on to being at the NBA Draft Combine. And also he rose at the Portsmouth. Really, actually, the story starts before then of how he rose. He rose because Akron stole a bid in the MAC. Toledo was the team to expect, but Toledo has several years allowed other secondary teams to get in, and Akron benefited. And Enrique Freeman was the guy who won from that 6'7", 7 foot plus wingspan. And with Freeman, he went from Portsmouth, really the tournament, to Portsmouth, to the G League camp, to the NBA Combine, and that is fantastic. And then another person who did that was Isaac Jones, who his story is even crazier because he was at JUCO and he was actually even in between that, he was loading trucks. That was so what he was doing. He kind of wasn't there with basketball. Like it wasn't falling into place. He was at JUCO for 3 years. And then he went to Idaho, was all Big Sky last year, and then goes to the Pac-12 at Washington State, and it is all Pac-12. And then he goes, same thing, NCAA tournament, Portsmouth, G League camp, NBA Combine, potentially drafted. So you gotta give props to those kind of stories where guys rise and they really go from end to end and climb the ladder. And I think there's really something cool to be said about that. Those are the two most interesting stories in my eyes, but I'll get to some more superlatives I have written down here that are not on the side. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. I love sports and I love them so much that I don't want them to stop. I don't want the seasons to end. The worst time of the year for me is that MLB All-Star week when the All-Star game is done, but there's literally nothing happening. But as the playoffs have just ended now, both in the NBA and NHL after the Game 7 last night where the Panthers won, we had fewer games across our spring and winter sports that carry into the summer. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sporting betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so second segment, I'm going to do some more of these draft superlatives. I think one that is really interesting is the best analytical darling. So I put anybody who is a BPM, which is box plus minus. It's generally an not all in one necessarily, but a pretty big summarizing stat of impact into one ranking. I put anybody over 9. Which I thought was interesting. So guys that just killed it in the analytical department, and they're going to be rising for their analytics. Zach Edey's an unfair one. Absolutely number one. He raked in every single category, going from 15 BPM, the next high, 15 and a half. The next highest is 14 with Donovan Clingan. Really low turnover rate, high block rate, got to the free throw line at the highest rate of any player. I mean, in the top 50 that I can even see of BPM. So that is an absurd number. The next closest was Deron Holmes. He was 72% or for 72 free throw rate. Zaccharie was 81. Only took 2 threes. That's really the only thing that really hurts him. But he's somebody that I think could be eventually a shooter. Like in Purdue, he didn't need to be a shooter because you're 7'4" and why do you need to do anything other than dominate the paint when everybody's smaller than you? So in the NBA, he has to change his game. I think even shooting a 15-foot mid-range jump shot would do a lot. I ultimately do buy into him maybe taking a few threes every once in a while, not like a game, maybe like 1 3 a game. And that's enough to really make a difference. So I would say it's probably him just by default. It's a really unfair answer, but somebody else who I think is an analytical darling that we don't talk about, I'd say 2 forwards that they're both 6'9" that I think are really impressive analytically. Jonathan Mogbo, if you can cross 10 BPM, you're going to be on a lot of radars. Mogbo was that at San Francisco. Now, the downside with him is he does not shoot the 3 ball. Absolutely does not shoot. And when you're not a center, because he is not a center on either end of the floor, and you don't shoot the ball, it's a little bit tough. And his free throw percentage is like fine, just about 70%. But with no volume from 3, it's really hard to project that going forward. I also just don't think he separates super well on drives, which is something interesting I've picked up on. But it could be something to do with spacing. Maybe it's just the crowdedness. It's hard to separate in college a little bit more than in the NBA. But I also, on the other hand, think in the NBA, defenders are better and harder to separate from. So if you're not shooting and you're not separating from players and you're not a big, it's tough. So he's an honorable mention. I do think that sometimes the analytics beat out factors like that, where sometimes it just works and it's an indicator of upside. And this could be stuff that we just don't see. Another one who I really like, I think Dylan Dessou is not on enough radars. He's somebody we haven't talked about much on this show, which I'm guilty of, obviously. And you know, I think with him, he's somebody who does a little bit of everything. He's not a great shooter, but 81% from the line is an extremely promising mark. Let me correct that. He shot very well. He shot 45% from 3 this year, but the volume was low. It was only 93s. So it's a very promising sign. If he does shoot, he's a surefire NBA player. Like if that is real, if those 2 numbers, that free throw percentage and 3-point percentage numbers are real, you found yourself a really good sleeper forward because he can defend. He averaged a steal and a block a game, which is a benchmark a lot of teams look for. He had really good advanced stats numbers, doesn't really make a ton of mistakes, can play the 4-5, has long arms, very good athlete. Like he checks out in that department. One other name I think that is worth mentioning is Jalen Williams. And I know I have to spell that out. It's spelled the same way Jay Will on Oklahoma City from Arkansas is spelled. Not only does he have one of the best like analytic profiles, 83% from the free throw line, 39% from three, also low volume, but again, just one of those things you hope it does translate. He finishes very well at the rim, gets to the line a decent amount, just overall really efficient and knew how to play the game at a high level. Like he quickly processes the game so well. I saw him in Portsmouth, and when I was watching him play, I haven't been a fan of his over the years, to be 100% honest. I thought he was the worst of the three Jalen Williams, and that probably still is the case, but that's just by default, right? Like you're not beating J-Dub because he's on path to potentially compete with all-star games at this point. Jalen Williams on the Thunder has been playing in the playoffs for the Thunder as well. And at this point, is Jalen Williams this one, the third, going to play on the Thunder? Probably. But I think with him, he's adapted to every role. I mean, he shot 57% from the field this year. Like that's insane as somebody who had to take the team was awkwardly built. John A. Broom was there. I don't know how he made it work, but he ended up doing it. That team has always confused me a little bit of how some guys make it work and some don't. But Jalen Williams is somebody who I think is a really good fit. When I saw him at Portsmouth, there's just the processing speed was fantastic. He was the guy, I think he was put on a bad team, but he is somebody who just made everyone else better, made the right plays, and made them quick. And that was a big distinguishing trait was a lot of the guys I saw there, I was like, okay, he got the ball, not Jalen, but other players, and I'm not going to name names of who they were, but they would catch the ball, take a minute, look around, and then make the decision. Jalen, by the time he had caught it, had already done the prep work and had known where to make the play, what to do at the right time. And that's why his turnover numbers, he never had more than like 1 year. He had 1.8 turnovers per game. The next lowest is 1.2, or next highest, I should say. So that I feel like the stats summarize Jalen Williams a lot. I think he's a big time sleeper. He's one of my guys I would give a two-way to with no hesitation in this class. He's big. He's athletic. He's super smart, can potentially shoot. If the shot's real, why is he not on more boards? So I really like him, but that's the analytical guys. Let's talk about some of these other superlatives coming up in just a minute. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, last segment here. Again, my name is Richard Stayman. Quick shout out to, first of all, everybody who continues to listen, but also if you haven't checked out my final draft board I just posted on my Substack, you can find that on my Twitter as well, MavsDraft. But let's talk about some of these other superlatives. So we have one more on, actually we have two more. I got the smartest player. Who am I kidding? Most likely, how did he fall player? Every single year we ask ourselves, how did this player fall? Like Brandon Clark, I remember everybody was questioning how he fell, even Grant Williams. So I apologize to Mavs fans that do not like him, but he is somebody. Desmond Bane was somebody I remember, in Tyrese Maxey in 2020, Tyrese Halliburton in 2020. I mean, even Franz Wagner, people thought would go to Golden State. So that almost counts. But there are other guys like Trey Murphy falling to 17, Jalen Johnson to 20. And we always ask ourselves, how did this guy fall this hard and this far? Like we see it every single year. You can go year by year and say, how did this guy not go as like higher? Tari Eason is another great example. So I really like him. I think those are kind of guys that we're trying to find in this draft. And with that, I would say the how did he fall guy, probably Ron Holland. Like this is a slam dunk pick for me, is just why. Like I think on draft Twitter, every single year there's a big, just a big difference in players. I mean, I could go almost year by year. I'd say 2019 was the largest volume of that, though. I think you had Grant Williams was somebody a lot of people liked, Brandon Clark. There were several other players too, but those were the absolute big ones, and both of those guys fell into the 20s. So, and I remember draft Twitter was like, well, we had these guys all top 10. What did we miss? Like, why are teams so low on them? And then we're seeing that with Ron Holland in plain sight too. Teams are at like through the biggest outlets, they're admitting, hey, like teams don't like him. Like we don't like this guy. And I think Ron Holland is the clearest example of somebody that easily could be a star upside. And I think he has a pretty safe floor. Somebody, I think it was Mike Garcia, if you're not following him, Canyon Driver, he had posted something about if he could be like Jaden McDaniels, if he could scale down, that's such a win in this draft. Like even if he doesn't become a star, having that outcome with star upside as realistic attainment, says a lot. And I think that's a big player who could easily just prove people wrong and outplay his draft stock. A couple other candidates of this, Nikola Topic on Mega, the injury really hurts him, so that's an understandable one. But I think if it's a team that doesn't need to win, that may say like, hey, why did he fall? Why did the injuries matter so much? I'd say another is Jalen Tyson. I think he's somebody a lot of people on Draft Twitter are pretty high on. Do it all wing that's had an interesting story. For those who don't know, I'm from Dallas. I have seen him play for years in prep as well, and like in train and all that. Hard worker, really athletic. He's been in 3 schools, 3 years. Yes, he was originally at Texas Tech, flipped his commitment to Texas to follow Chris Beard. Chris Beard didn't give him any minutes, kind of misled him on what his role would be. He left, went to Texas Tech. Mark Adams was racist, had racist allegations against him, and a lot of it was with Jalen Tyson as the victim to it. So he left. Understandable, I think, on both fronts. And then this year at Cal, yeah, he didn't win, but it was year 1 of a rebuild, and he helped shape the culture, and the team just wasn't that good. So I think that is something where you look at what he does, and I think that is a guy who should be top 20, but he probably won't go top 20. And then another is Deron Holmes, where, I mean, he's just one of the smartest players in the draft. I already talked about that. The processing speed, the quick learning ability from everything I've heard is just off the charts. I really like him. I think he should be a top 15 pick. I would take him in the lottery and not think twice. So I think those are kind of guys where we could say, how did this guy fall? Now, if you wanted the upside play, who I do think ultimately will fall, I mean, I think Tijon Salon could fall at this point. And by fall, I mean maybe to like the end of the lottery, because he was at 1 point up to 8, maybe out of it. And I think he could be somebody that we say, okay, like there was so much upside in a class that didn't have it. How come he didn't? And then another floor player too, just looking at my board, Tyler Kolek. I mean, he's a floor general that can come in day 1 and make everybody else better. Why would you not take him in the first round? And that leads to the last one. I would say the last 2, actually. So I got 2 more superlatives, the best glue guy. And I think that one, hands down, Baylor Shireman. You don't find players who shoot, pass, and rebound as well as him, even if he's a bad defender. Those kind of guys make everyone around them better, especially their bigs too. And I think that's just as easy as it gets. Another one could be Anton Watson. If he clicks, he's a guy who just will make everyone better if he eventually can shoot. But he has that one skill where it's like he has to be there. He has to shoot to really be on the floor. So hard to really list him right away. Kevin McCullough could be one. As I mentioned, defense is there. Shooting has grown a lot. He's somebody who is just outside of my top 30. I think he could be that role. The best motor. This is the last one. I really like this because there's a lot of bigs with incredible motors in this class. Yves Missy's up there, but I think Adem Bona has to take the cake, right? Like, I mean, he's been the consensus crown guy for the best motor, and it's very earned. He doesn't take plays off. For a guy who played on a team that didn't win many games, he sure acted like he was the one staple every game who never took plays off. He didn't let the losing affect him. And if you're a rebuilding team that wants to find a big that could eventually be serviceable, why would you not take Bona? You've already seen what would happen if he's tested by adversity on the court and he's passed. And he still plays hard. He stays true to himself. He doesn't try to be something else. I think that's really impressive. And for me, I'm just all into those motor guys like that. I would say Isaac Jones is another, as I've mentioned before, where he just plays hard. Big shout out to the last one. I think this is a sleeper I haven't mentioned yet, and that's Zion Pollin. And with Zion, I really like his story too. He reworked his shot last year heading into Florida, transferring from UC Riverside. And now he was one of the best defenders in the SEC. Really good shooter. Should have been at the combine, in my opinion. But I think he plays extremely hard, and it helps him every level he's been at. And he should absolutely be on there too. So that was the superlatives. Leave a comment if you have any other questions on best this, best that. I will absolutely answer these in the comments. But really appreciate everybody who continues to listen to Locked On NBA Big Board. Tomorrow is draft day. We're going to try and get all 3 of us on the show to do some roundtable stuff again in the past, which has always been really fun. Really appreciate everybody again, and we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you.